Welcome to Fool's Gold. I'm Cara Cordoni. In a world where everyone sells sparkles, how can we tell glitter from gold? Join me in exploring discernment in the age of grift. The views and opinions expressed on Fool's Gold do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast, its host, or its producers. Any content provided by our guests, contributors, or authors represents their own opinions and experiences and is not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, or entity. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fool's Gold, Discernment in the Age of Grift. I am really excited to have Bronwyn Rideout with us today. Did I say it right, Bronwyn?
Yeah, you did.
Fantastic. She is joining us from New Zealand, where she is both a midwife and a researcher and writer, specifically with the New Zealand Skeptics. And we're excited to get together because Bronwyn has been writing about Highden since 2022.
Oh, brilliant.
Right? And done some really deep dives into Highden, which is connected to ISTA, just for our audience, right? So there's two organizations or organisms. One is the International School of Temple Arts, ISTA, that we've talked about. And then there's this interweaving and overlap with Highden Temple, specifically through Bruce Lyon, who is the leader there.
Mhm.
And we'll be able to explore some of that overlap as I turn it over to you, Bronwyn, to take us through, how you got involved in the research. I think a little background on your skepticism
Sure.
and then digging into Haydn and what you found.
Perfect. Well, I mean, I guess I'll start sort of with the skeptical part. That's really the most important part of the conversation. I am the chair of the New Zealand Skeptics, and if it's okay, I'll happy to tell your listeners a little bit about what we do.
Yeah.
Um, we are, we're the New Zealand Skeptics, but we are sort of part of a loosely connected international, you know, movement or network of skeptical organizations that we have in the U.S., Canada, the UK, Hong Kong, worldwide. We're a worldwide network.
Okay.
But in New Zealand, the Skeptics have been operating since 1986. This year's actually our 40th anniversary, so happy birthday to us. But when we started in 1986, we were known as NZ SciCop, which is the New Zealand Committee for the Scientific Investigation of the Paranormal. So, we're no longer exclusively investigating the paranormal. We have now a much broader remit. And as
Mm.
we kind of put it, as we put it succinctly on our website, you know, we're a network of New Zealanders again, but we're interested in examining what objective evidence, both scientific and otherwise, that exists to support claims made about the paranormal, as well as the supernatural, which they are different things. We look at alternative health practices quite a bit,
Right.
creationism, anywhere where science, pseudoscience, and shonky science interact. So the true beating heart of our work is to question practices and to minimize harm or negative impact that these claims can have, because often those claims are used to take advantage of people at their most vulnerable. And you can kind of see where cults actually, talking about cults and investigating cults and exposing cults and coercive groups and charismatic leaders really do fit into the work that we do.
Mhm. And how long have you been with the Skeptics?
I've been involved in sort of skeptical activities since about 2010, 2011. Um,
Right.
we sort of have a sister informal organization called Skeptics in the Pub, and that's where skeptics come and meet at a pub. Um, they're sort of independent from Skeptics of New Zealand
Okay.
Skeptics, but we're pretty close. We're pretty much one and the same in many ways. So in 2021, I wanted to become more involved in organized skepticism. I joined the Skeptic Society, and in that same year, that's how I started writing articles for the newsletter. And my
Yes.
articles have largely been about multi-level marketing schemes, internet trends and culture, particularly things that do involve like the cult, claims of telekinesis. So again, I'm
Okay.
still kind of picking at that paranormal, But I have a PhD in midwifery. My PhD was in the pregnancy experiences of autistic people in Aotearoa.
Oh, wow.
I'm autistic myself. So disability activism,
Yeah.
autism, neurodiversity movement, that's all very close to my heart as well. So a lot of
Yeah.
what I write about is scams regarding autism, because
Yeah.
there are a lot of pseudoscientific claims made about how you cure autism. And yeah, and then, the piece de resistance is looking at cults and coercive groups, but it's all done with a particularly New Zealand lens, because New Zealand does have a very interesting connection and attraction for cults and
Mm.
coercive groups.
Right. We've got Centerpoint, which is historically a horrific
Yes.
cult. You've got Gloriaville, which is still active. Um, though hopefully, being critiqued and approached because of labor laws, I've
Yes.
heard.
Yeah. But also
Um,
we have a really interesting, as I said, a really interesting occult history.
okay.
When in sort of during colonial times, colonial New Zealand kind of coincided with the spiritualist movement.
Ah,
So there was sort of a big spiritualist stream in New Zealand. We also had the Whare Ra. That's a property in Hawke's Bay that's connected to the Golden Dawn.
okay.
So that's sort of, that's an occult group that, Aleister
Right.
Crowley and Yeats were involved with. Um, and we also, in very many ways, New Zealanders, they are a population that like to travel, do their overseas experiences. And sorry, I need to cough for a second. So people end up bringing back different religious beliefs, or they get involved in
Okay.
religious beliefs. So we have some very prominent very prominent, I'm sorry, like so many New Zealanders actually take on prominent roles in overseas cults. So you have David Mayo, who was very, very close to L. Ron Hubbard, just
Oh,
before L. Ron Hubbard died. So it was very important with putting out those new levels, those new Thetan levels in the 70s and 80s. This is pre-David Miscavige, though.
right.
Um, Prem Adiram Samraj end up getting an island donated to him by someone who had grown up in New Zealand. Um, and,
Wow.
and
I think
finally,
of California because I'm from California and we are also a cult hub,
Mhm.
generating many, many cults, but I did not realize I had that in common with New Zealand overall.
Yeah. So, you know, yeah, there's a very interesting cult nexus or coercive group and an occult group nexus. Cults and occult aren't necessarily, they don't always intersect, but sometimes they do. But, we are
Right.
often sometimes the first place that an American cult will establish an international base, like the IBLP. So Gothard, New Zealand was the first place where they established an international center. Builders of the Adytum. New Zealand, again, was another place where they first established an international center. And actually, in many ways, we are sometimes the place where these international cults still survive. So, yeah,
Uh,
so it's interesting. So, obviously, I have lots of source material to write about.
right. And I was reviewing the writings that you did on Haydn. And so I thought what was particularly a fun entry point is that you actually visited Highden itself. So maybe talking about like where it's located and how you came to visit before researching it.
Well, I guess I'll start a little bit. I'll jump ahead before we jump back,
Okay, cool.
because it was for the newsletter. It was about June, July 2022. I had just sort of started really being a regular contributor to the newsletter. I wasn't quite the chair yet. And I was at Skeptics in the Pub meeting. I was talking to Mark Honeychurch, who is our editor as well as the society secretary, about article ideas. And this memory did pop up. So it was around 2013, and my now husband and I had just gotten engaged. We were living in Palmerston North, and that's around 30 to 40 minutes drive south of Highden. And his work colleagues had pitched in and got us a lovely engagement gift of an overnight stay or overnight getaway at Highden Manor. So this was back when it was still operated by Avril Drucker or Drucker maybe, and Andrew Michaels. We had a lovely stay there. But it's always the strange things that stick out in your mind. They had been giving us a tour of the property, and they showed us these photo albums of, the various past owners and iterations. And they mentioned that it had been a mystery school and then had also housed an alternative semester abroad program prior to them coming in. And don't quote me on this, or maybe you will because this is a podcast. Um, I think at the time there were still mandala stones that were still on the property.
Okay.
And I regret, I was there to enjoy my engagement. So I don't think we have very many pictures other than us, with little signs thanking our friends for giving us this lovely
Oh,
gift. Um, and also at the time, I was a little bit more intrigued about the alternative school program. And I had done a bit of rudimentary research. I had found some old websites for what was called the School Down Under. I didn't really think much of it. I'm like, okay, cool. Doesn't seem like it's obviously not operating now. It doesn't seem like this School Down Under is operating anymore. And I pop it away. And that was really that until this conversation I had nearly a decade later with my friend Mark.
right.
And, I casually, suggest to Mark, I'm like, oh, you should write about this. And Mark, in his expert deflection skills, goes, no, you should write about it. And so the rest is history. But when you think about the timelines, this is, as I said,
Right.
what, June, July 2022. My very
Yep.
first piece on Highden comes out in early August 2022.
Right.
And, that was pretty fortuitous because that was really like only a couple of months after the issues with ISTA and Highden Facebook page came out.
Hmm.
And while I hadn't joined the Facebook page until a little bit later, the access to that incident harm form really formalized the connection for me that, oh, it's not just about Highden. There's this other group here that we should be looking into,
Hmm.
and I should be considering in my article writing. And, because, I am an outsider to Tantra, I'm an outsider to the sort of whole, what can I say? Like the Tantra and New Age communal and industrial complex,
Yes.
that both ISTA and Haydn draw from. And that really blew up the story for me because then came across B. Schofield's article, which was largely about Andrew Barnes, found sex magic, Baba
Which is Dez's documentary.
documentary slash travel log, maybe. Um, and then a month after I had published my pieces or finished my 2-part series, that's when the Hertz article came out. The Hertz,
Oh, right. Right.
sorry,
From Israel.
and then Radio New Zealand had their piece on Haydn coming up maybe a month after that. So at the time, there's really this general feeling of momentum. There's always something for me to update every couple of months at that time.
Right. Right. And so giving us, as you did that research, you went into like, where is Haydn and who built it? Like, what are we talking about here?
Oh, well, it's kind of an interesting place. From what, the general information that's gathered, and this is probably I guess you could say the most accurate part of Haydn's history. So in 1888, Walter Woods Johnson, who's an MP for Manawatu at the time, bought about 1,000 acres of land and did name the estate after the Sussex property of his father-in-law, who was a 7th Baronet of Haydn over in the UK. The house was finally built in 1898, and the East Wing and the conservatory were sort of added in 1903. The land remained in the family until 1922 when Walter's wife, Catherine, died. They say the ghost of Catherine still haunts the halls, but she is probably the least interesting part of the story, sadly enough, for a skeptic. Um, um, and so in 1923, the Marist fathers in 1923, the Marist fathers sort of purchased a portion of the property, which retained the house and the farm buildings.
And
Um,
that's a religious group, the
yeah,
Marist
yeah. So I
brothers?
think they had a bit of a school down there as well.
Okay.
Um, and then after a period of time, it changed hands again to the Dalziel family, and they had sort of started off using it as a dual family home and function center. And
Okay.
to this
How
day,
how I was gonna say, so how big is this place? I mean, it's called Highden Manor, right? And
huge.
it's huge.
It's huge. It's beautiful. Um, I think I couldn't tell you the architectural style, but it is very grand.
Yeah.
there is sort of a old school Victorian Edwardian quality to it.
Yeah.
But you do have heated showers. There was internet at the time. But it has like a nice it had like a really lovely ballroom area. And when I went there, Avril and Andrew had done a really great job in terms of refurbishing it,
Nice.
and decorating it, because she was a professional decorator. So this place looked fancy. But it
Nice.
is grand property. Like there's also another like hostel aspect to it, like a
Okay.
2-story place where they have lots of apartments.
Bunkhouse or
Yeah.
okay.
Mm.
Great. So
Um,
back to your
Back to the
timeline. Sorry
story.
to interrupt. I'm just like people get a picture in their mind of like a grand
Mm.
Victorian Edwardian. It's like, yeah, very beautiful and intricate.
Like it's not like Downton Abbey. Downton Abbey. Downton Abbey. It's not my cottage for people who are listening to
Yeah,
Bridgerton. Um, you
you're
know,
right.
it's very, it's a very rural area. There are
Yeah.
properties, other farms around it, but you are very isolated out
Okay.
there. So, sorry. So yeah, it was this dual family home function center, and it actually remained, I think even today, when you look at the company's register, because there is all this, like a lot of information about who owns Highden, the various companies that Bruce Lyon owns, his family owns, that's all actually easily accessible. You can actually access that information. It's not massively detailed, but you can do if you want to piece together bits and pieces of the story, you can do that through the company's register.
Yeah.
And I think to this day, it's still listed as a function center. But really what hooked me as a skeptic is
Yeah.
when Haydn was purchased from the Dalziel family by a Danish physician named Finn Scott Anderson. Now, the information that I originally got from Manawatu heritage websites at the time, which is 2022, called him Dr. Humelgarten. And they said that he had bought Haydn in 2000 and used it as a Shambhala learning center. But that's inaccurate. First of all, um, they misspelt the name. But also
Okay.
Humelgarten was not his name. There was no Dr. Humelgarten. Humelgarten was the name of a now closed and bankrupt Danish clinic that specialized in alternative treatments for cancer.
Oof.
Mm. So it was that clinic in Denmark was founded in 1945 by a raw food advocate who had been excluded from the Danish Medical Association themselves because they had a diabetic patient die in their care due to these alternative treatments. Um, the treatments in these clinics were quite costly. I think I was able to find that a 3-week treatment cost about equivalent to $13,000 in New Zealand alone. And one patient had paid over $200,000 in 2011 to treat a giant stomach tumor. It wouldn't be surprising to many skeptics when you use like these alternative therapies like mistletoe or the Gerson
Right.
therapy that they are like people are going to these therapies as a last ditch effort, but they're a last
Right.
ditch effort that won't work. So for this patient, they were on a diet of like herbs and dandelions. It didn't work. That patient died. And then so the clinic and the then head physician, who was Finn Scott Anderson, were accused by surviving family members and a former employee of those predatory practices.
Mm.
He led the clinic for about 30 years. So that was from 1979 through to 2012.
Whoa.
In the 2000s, his interest did turn to New Zealand. Information online that's easy to access is very scant on this, at least. But if you know where to look on the Wayback Machine, and lamentably, the best bits of information do come from a website called Campaign Against Foreign Control of Aotearoa, which can be a little bit here or there. And that website does log decisions made by the Overseas Investment Office. But unfortunately, you don't really get many of the decisions made prior to 2005. So, sorry, I'll say that again. According to the Manawatu standard, it was announced that this Danish buyer was going to purchase the property for $1.4 million. Um, what the website for the campaign against foreign control revealed was that Huma Garden was owned by Finn Scott Anderson in Denmark. It was 15 hectares that he was able to buy at that time. And yeah, he was looking to actually establish a similar operation in New Zealand in that building. But also said it was going to be an education center as well. So he buys the property. Oh, wait, sorry. In September 5th, 2000, Huma Garden as a company, was incorporated with 3 directors, all of them listed in Denmark. But Bruce Lyon appears on the application as the person authorized to accept documents on behalf of the company. In the same application, you still see the association being listed as running an international health center, which will use methods of innovative, holistic, and natural medicine in the treatment of cancer. So that was sort of the original intention, in part, of that.
Interesting. So for me, it seems surprising that Bruce Lyon was involved so early. Kind of, I didn't know that he was involved in that part of the transition.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's interesting because his association with Finn Scott Anderson likely starts far earlier than that. So this is where the Wayback Machine becomes quite useful. And I have found archived websites for a 1997 conference hosted by the University of the Seven Rays. And there's a Bruce Lyon and a Dr. Finn Scott Anderson who are part of a panel called Founding Colleges of Occultism, the Hope and the Challenge. So they were at least one conference together under the auspices of the University of the Seven Rays. And we can talk about that, what that organization is in a few minutes.
yeah.
At that same conference, Finn also had a solo presentation called Esoteric and Alternative Approaches to the Treatment of Cancer, in which he presented what he called effective alternatives to standard cancer therapies like mistletoe and esoteric healing as presented by the Tibetan. And if you know the language, who the Tibetan is, that the Tibetan is usually a term used to refer to Master DK or Jewel Kuhl, who is an ascended master, well known within theosophy, as well as the spin-off work of Alice Bailey. But we also hear about Master DK in sort of that wider New Age milieu, because the ascended masters are a very common concept that has sort of escaped the containment of theosophy.
Right.
So there was that connection obviously started
Right.
for a while.
All right. Which one do we follow? Maybe the Seven Rays and then loop back to the Tibetan?
Well, I'm happy to sort of move to the Seven Rays because we'll talk a little bit about who Bruce is in a way
Yeah.
to sort of contextualize where he is in that structure. So, lots to say about Bruce. To know about Bruce, he was born in 1957. He is, I believe, the second of 4 siblings from the first marriage of Cliff Lyon. Cliff was the former managing director of Waddy's, which, for many New Zealanders, they'll know Waddy's Ketchup. That later merged with another company called Goodman Fielder. Again, that's another well-known food wholesaler, distribution, marketer in New Zealand, Australia. And when that merger happened, Cliff Lyon was made chairman.
Okay.
As I said, both major manufacturers. I have read Kamala Devi's book, Sex Shamans. So I have read, Bruce's section, his contributions. And in that book, Bruce does state that he started university at the University of Auckland when he was about 16. He graduated with a Bachelor of Science, but also on his website, he does state that he has a Master's of Science in Esotericism and a PhD in Esotericism. And those 2 degrees come from the University of the Seven Rays. Now, the University of the Seven Rays itself was founded in either 1985 or 1987. I've seen 2 different dates. However, the 1985 date I picked up from Michael Robbins, who was the founder of the organization. But this was sort of near the end of his life when he was saying these dates, and he wasn't quite sure himself. So one or the other. And that school is, attached to the Moriah Foundation, which in turn is also connected to Lucis Trust. And they are steeped in what they would call the Trans-Himalayan tradition, or really more specifically, um, these are teachings from this Tibetan master, Djwhal Khul. Um, and Djwhal Khul is believed to have telepathically dictated these teachings to a theosophist named Alice Bailey between 1919 and 1914. Now, Djwhal Khul, being a ascended master, does not exist. He's doing this transmissions from a spiritual ashram, non-existent plane. So, the question that always arises when you're talking about maybe Madame Blavatsky or Alice Bailey, it's like, did anyone question this, within their own circles? And often, no. People very much took them at their word that, they
Right.
were receiving these very important transmissions. I guess, Trans-Himalayan tradition, as Bruce has been presenting it, is quite complicated. But I guess let's explain it like a 5 version of this work is that there are these ascended masters. Sometimes they are, they absolutely are individuals who developed on a different spiritual plane. Other times they are humans who have evolved spiritually to ascend to these new planes of existence, like, say, Jesus or Comte de Saint Germain. And if you are familiar with the I Am movement and Guy and Edna Ballard, you would know about Saint Germain or Count Germain. And what these ascended people do is that they're trying to help human beings ascend spiritually so that they can move into the next level of our spiritual evolution. And in many ways, it's about improving the world, peace, resolving all global conflict. But at the same time, there is still a hierarchy of, there's going to be people who are more leaders, who are better at this, who are more spiritually
Right.
enriched than others. So there is still space where manipulation is rife.
Right. And my understanding is it was Blavatsky who was the first
Mhm.
to popularize
Yes.
this idea of the ascendant masters. So a lot of us that have grown up in the new age world, I've heard of it. I didn't have any context, but then to find out like, oh, this is the origin story of that concept, which just is all over the place now in new age circles,
Mhm.
started with this
Theosophy.
this one person, theosophy.
And,
Yeah.
and 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 that is really, really interesting, that sort of lineage in a way that. So Helena Blavatsky, she is channeling, or she's getting these telepathic messages. But there is some indication that the people that she was presenting as, oh, this is Master K, Master DK, were based on people that she knew.
Uh-huh.
You know, and she was just kind of like, I don't know, real person fan fiction. That might be a bit of a crass way. But then, she dies, and maybe a couple decades later, there ends up being a schism within theosophy, of which one of the people who spin off is Alice Bailey. And Alice Bailey, in terms of establishing her own lineage, makes similar stories, makes similar claims about channeling the same people plus some that
Right.
Helena Blavatsky did. Um, and
Which is also what
Bruce
Bruce says.
Yes, and another one of sort of Bruce, someone who does also follow Bruce. What's his name? John Darrell Rue. He kind of described it as that the transmissions Master DK's transmissions to Blavatsky and Bailey were kind of the first of 3 phases.
Ah.
And what does he to quote what Darrell wrote? These 3 phases embody a continually unfolding revelation concerning the deepest mysteries of reality, cosmos, and Earth and humanity. And the 3rd phase of Khul's teachings were said to emerge in 2025, which has just passed. And that is when all these enlightened masters and saints and other beings were supposed to gather and eventually open and visibly appear on Earth. Like 2025
Oh.
was meant to be this year of this massive spiritual congress in which all these ascended masters would make a decision of, are we going to reveal our spiritual hierarchy, or are we going to make the Earth work for another 50 or so, 100 so years? Because apparently they have
Mm.
this, yeah, every so often, every century. So yeah, 2025 was supposed to be a big year.
don't think it was a big year that way, or
Yeah.
I missed it. I'm left behind. Didn't get caught up with the ascended masters.
Yeah, but apparently, there were, if, even but before 2025, it was possible for some preparatory teachings to emerge earlier than that to help people prepare for
Right.
2025. And yeah, that's the role that kind of Bruce had for that third job, third phase.
So there's the school of the seven rays that
Right.
ties to the lineage in theosophy and Alice Bailey,
Yeah.
which connects to Bruce's teachings,
Yep.
where it was like for a few years, right? 2000 and something, where he said he was getting direct transmissions from
Yeah.
Master DK.
hmm Yeah. So I think it's not until 2005 that actually
Okay.
starts publishing, saying, "Oh, back with this group that he initially started the Highden School with." In the 2000s. He eventually
Right.
published those transmissions in 2005. His involvement with Alice Bailey and the University of Seven Rays, I'm not entirely sure exactly when that started. I came
Okay.
across a 2011 video with Michael Robbins, who again was the founder of the school, and he said that, he had known Bruce for 21 years. And so that was 2011
Okay.
at that point. So he kind of knew Bruce around 1990. And he already described that Bruce was part of that younger generation that was already starting to have a very strong teaching practice. In Kamala Devi's book, he writes that it was like 1988 that he was starting to study Bailey and the esoteric traditions.
Okay.
Or no, that was actually in his book Mercury
Oh,
Transmissions, in which he said that he was studying since 1988. So, whether the University of Seven Rays was really Lyon's sole source of information about, Master
right.
DK, it could be anyone's guess. As we've just talked about, it's kind of a widespread
Yeah.
belief. But I think Bruce had connections. His connections to the organization, such as Robbins, such as Finn Scott Anderson, as well as a New
Right.
Zealand-based astrologer named Lawson Bracewell.
Okay.
And to me, in my opinion, that indicates that at least the influence of the Seven Rays persisted for that period of the 90s through to at least the early 2000s, until he start moving into more of the ISTA side of things.
Right. Well, in my understanding from talking to people and I guess his writings about as we talk about the training, the temple trainings that he started and continues, that each of those is a different ray. So there's like this most recent set of trainings is the sixth ray, for example. So
Mhm.
depending on, you know, how much he attributes that to the lineage, he's definitely still using that language and that framing for what he's up to.
But also in Kamala Devi's book, he says, "What's your?" They have a section for each of the contributors to say, "Who's your
Yeah.
teacher, your lineage?" And he just puts down Trans Himalayan. And whereas a lot of the other contributors do, like they list sometimes they list Bruce, they list other
Right.
people, and it's like, well, maybe mention Lawson at least, or or maybe even some
Interesting.
who he was initially going to develop Hyde school with, like Aggie Lim.
Right.
There's some missing names there in that story, I feel, in my opinion.
In, in your opinion, based on your research. So take us back. So there's this point where Hayden, Bruce is involved, but he's not the point person. And then
Not on
that
not
school,
officially, not on paper.
not on paper.
Not on paper. Online, it's a little bit of a different story. Because,
Oh,
as I said, the timelines are always a little bit vague, but I have been able to find like these archived versions of the Hyden School website. So we do know that there's this connection with Finn Scott Anderson in 1997. In 2000, Anderson buys the property. So yeah, I think they've been advertising this Hyden School through a company called Simply Sacred. So, before Hayden, Bruce has a variety of careers, and he writes about this in multiple spots. So he says he's been a fisherman, an investment banker, a counselor. I think in Kamala Devi's book, it's mentioned that he had a psychotherapy practice because he does have a diploma in hypnotherapy and psychotherapy. I'm not exactly
okay.
sure where that comes from, though. But also he, at the same time that, in the early 2000s, he was the executive director of another foodstuff company called
Oh,
Neil Cropper and Co., which was also a company that his father had worked for. For any New Zealanders who might be listening, Neil Cropper and Co. probably was best known at this time for being the distributor of Bundaberg ginger beer in New Zealand. So, doing some
yum.
very popular distribution. um, so they get this property, they have this website, they're trying to attract students to come in. And they use their Simply Sacred website. They have a magazine that they're publishing, that they're presenting this proposal for the school and getting applications. And I also know that he was advertising in, I think, some Google, not Google, but I guess in the old bulletin board forums,
Okay.
those old forums, and in other allied publications, so similar New Age publications in New Zealand at the
Right.
time, because I have come across it in a couple spots. The stated goals of that property, they said, oh yeah, we're still going to continue the hospitality business, but we're also going to set up this spiritually based education activity for adults and young adults. So I guess you're thinking about maybe late teens, early 20s.
Okay.
And as it was published on the website, the school was a part of a beginning phase of the externalizing of several pairs of schools around the world. The intention behind these centers of soul-based education was to assist in the spiritual unfoldment and illumination of the humanity. So very much, it is Alice Bailey, specifically Alice Bailey's book called DeCult Meditation. Um, and, so each school may have citizens of all nations cooperatively contributing to its function, but the schools would eventually be powerful points of distribution for the soul of the nation in which they are located. So very high, very lofty, very bombastic goals here. And I think, however, New Zealand was going to be a minor school, whereas the major school was supposed to be established in Australia. But as I said, this outline is like, it's almost in many points when they've republished this, both on the main Highden page, once they actually get the school rolling, as well as on
Yeah.
Simply Sacred, very much taken almost word from Alice as to what the formation of this is going to be. Highden, when it was operating, was intended to offer like a 3-year program for anyone ages 21 to 42. I don't know why, that's very specific range.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the curriculum was going to be quite rich. It was going to be like esoteric theory, like astronomy and astrology, working with energies, psychology, magic, practical occultism, and finding one's soul vocation. And God, the operation sounds so quaint and miles away, like continents practically, galaxies compared to how Haydn's operating now. Can you guess how much he charged for people to come to Haydn back in the
At that time for
at
the
that time?
3-year
And we're
program?
like talking about 2000, 2003.
I don't know.
No tuition. But
What?
there were expectations that students would contribute approximately $150 New Zealand per week for room and board, as well as I think chip in on chores.
Wow, so that's a radical departure,
Yeah.
from or a radical history that they departed from,
hmm
because
Because now
that
it's like
doesn't sound too
6,000,
expensive.
six of that $7,000 for like what, the 6-week temple
6
training.
weeks. Right. Whoa.
Mm.
Ah,
So, the Haydn School, as it was known at that point, opens in June 2001. It had 4 teachers, like 4 other teachers aside from Bruce and I think potentially Victoria, who was his work colleague at the time, or his
okay,
his co-directors, partner in crime, partner in business. And so 4 other teachers joining the mix, and they had 12 students.
okay.
So aside from what Bruce published in 2005 about the transmissions he received during that time. Haven't really been able to get much more detail. In one of the last Simply Sacred magazines that we do have at our National Library in New Zealand, for whatever reason, they do put some pictures of some of the, students who are going to be coming in. So, and I think if you can't, you can search around and you can find student profiles
Interesting.
of who was there. Some of them I have not been able to find since, so who knows? Maybe they've sort of gone underground or done other things with their life. Um, So it seems that it always struggled. The concept of the school always struggled to find its footing. It changed its name to the Shambhala School in October 2001. And I think it's that Shambhala that was the name that it was
Oh,
kind of that concept of the Shambhala School was something that kind of even still persists today in association with
right.
Haydn. And in January 2002, they obviously had a drop off of students. So the school roll consisted still of 4 teachers, but only 8 students. When the second year commenced in June of 2002, only 3 students returned, but they got
Okay.
9 new enrollees from like New Zealand, Australia, Denmark, the US, and apparently Iran and Colombia as well. 2003 ends up being this big year of upheaval. Finn Scott Anderson wants to sell the property. So they don't know what's happening. They're obviously not keeping students. What sort of happens in terms of organization of like they stop giving numbers. So it appears that maybe a
Oh,
small group of students returned, but they sort of kind of created 2 different organizations. You have the Shambhala School, or I should say maybe 2 sub entities within Haydn.
okay.
You have the Shambhala School, which is about a core group of 7. And then you have a small group of students who returned for that final year in 2003 under what they called the Preparatory School of Occidental Meditation. So that was, yeah, about 3 students, returning students, and then 2 additional people who were doing other projects. It's not quite clear who those 2 people were. And Anderson did offer the property to Bruce and Victoria Stone at that point, but they couldn't.
Yeah.
They weren't able to purchase it, so it went on the market. And the
Okay.
very first of the new buyers are these 2 educators from America, Ken Ferguson and Wendland Wagner. And they were interested in purchasing Haydn, as I said before, for this sort of high school study abroad program, which they called
Right.
School Down Under. So they are the first of the intermediate owners of the Haydn. Yeah.
And so when that happened, like, did Bruce and Shambhala and stuff leave because now they don't own the property? This other school is now
No, no,
buying it. Yeah,
no.
how'd that work?
Hard to say. Looking
Okay.
at what is still archived, uh,
Yeah.
I think on the Haydn end, one of their teachers was, I think her name is Shushita Davenport. She presented it as, hey, like we're actually, kind of not twin flames, twin spirits, but there was some simpatico in their goals. And a
Okay.
couple of those teachers who were part of the Shambhala Haydn School were kind of actually providing some extramural or extracurricular education like yoga and stuff like that. So it seems that they were still around, like they were allowed to stay and do stuff. But that's kind of that's my presumption. That's my
Uh,
opinion. However, when you look at the School Down Under website, their archive version, they played a little bit safer and they described
mm.
the manor as being the home of a small philosophy institute.
Sounds lovely.
Mhm. So just a little bit about Kent Ferguson, because he has written books about this, not
Okay.
about Haydn, but about, his teaching. You'll be able to easily find him online. He's someone who had 3 decades of experience as an educator, including
Okay.
25 years as a headmaster of a school called the Santa Barbara Middle School, which is apparently or at least one time was a very experimental, very innovative school. And
Okay.
his emphasis was on spiritual development by incorporating indigenous traditions and mythology, but it also seems that there's like lots of outdoor education in general as well. So he kind of brought that similar outlook to the School Down Under, providing a balance of academics like practical geometry, biology, and history, but also with a combination of some more esoteric and traditional after school activities. So some of these kids got access to flight simulators, but I think, yeah, as I said, you have yoga and things like that. He purchased Haydn under the company name of Fireseed LLC for 1.6 million. And they appear, at least Shambhala School and the School Down Under appear to at least coexist through to late 2003. But after that point, you definitely see more of the Shambhala School migrating to online and possibly having in-person gatherings if they do that elsewhere. Ferguson himself appears to have owned the property at least until 2008, 2009. But the school itself had actually stopped maybe about 3 years prior, like the School Down Under had stopped
Okay.
operating. And in 2007, that campaign against foreign control of Aotearoa, they had advertised, they had listed all the different companies who had to like relinquish land or relinquish like very sensitive land because of nothing was happening with it. And Fireseed LLC was listed as one of the companies that had to like sell the land.
Oh, wow.
What that means, again, without that historical data, I can't really quite interpret what happened or
Mhm.
whether Kent was forced to sell the property or not.
Mhm.
And that kind of leads to kind of almost where I kind of come into the story. The next purchasers were, again, Avril Drucker and Andrew Michaels. They purchase it in December 18th, 2008. They move in by January 2009, and they kind of commence this 8-month renovation project, But by the end of 2010, they're kind of in the news again because of a bust up with New Zealand Overseas Investment Office, but not because of anything they did, but actually
Oh,
involving some Buddhists. So yeah.
what's happening?
Oh my God, lots of stuff. So there's a group called the New Kadampa Tradition, or NKT. That's a branch of Buddhism that opposes the Dalai Lama. And
Okay.
they intended to use Highden as like this multi-use venue, having a national center for Buddhist study, a visitor center, like and like as a spiritual base. So that again, very much attracted to this lovely building and doing all this
Yeah.
stuff with it. And even though Highden wasn't on the market, the NKT had approached the couple and said, we want to purchase this. Pretty soon after they opened the estate, because they were going to use it as a function center and do
Oh,
it for weddings
right.
and like, visitors as a B&B. Um, and, at the time, Drucker and Michaels go into the deal because the history of the NKT looked really good. Like they were apparently good for the money. They had a portfolio of
Right.
high profile and historic properties. The contracts were signed and the Overseas Investment Office approval was pending. But then in August 2010, NKT withdraws, stating that they were unable to meet the contract conditions. And that was pretty financially damaging for Drucker and Michaels. They sued NKT because they had missed out on the wedding season because they were expecting to sell.
Uh,
So they were awarded 1.08 million in a court settlement
wow.
and then continued to operate Highden for several more years until returning it to the market at the end of January 2016.
Wow. So I know at one point it had sold for 1.6, but they were able to get a million back from this lost revenue. That's pretty big number.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and you can also imagine with a property like that and in overseas international office, like the lawyers as well. So I think there's definitely other
Right.
costs
Right.
or at least how much
Right.
they spent on the renovation. So yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows if they may have done extra stuff. So Haydn's back in the market. This is 2016. As we know, the Shambhala school is kind of still ticking along online. And I guess, but for whatever reason, Lyon still has his heart on this property and he decides to try to buy it again for keeps. And this is kind of, I think all this information is still online through the Highden and Bruce Lyon's Facebook page. But if you also look at my articles, you can see the screenshots from back then. The purchase price had now bumped up to 2.4 million. So Lyon does sign a purchase agreement based on verbal support from Robert Nichols, aka Baba Dez, and a third party who has been unnamed. This third party backed out, so Lyon posts a plea online for support to fundraise the other $800,000. And that was posted on February 23rd, 2017. And while he sort of accepted standard loans and monetary gifts, there was also an option to join this purchase as an investor, or what he'd call a pillar of the temple.
Okay.
And he initially sought 12 investors at $250,000 each. And when you think about it, like, wait a minute, the total is more than $800,000. What is the math? He did note that the extra money will be invested in the property. But he did receive some feedback, so he restructured the partnership plan to be a limited partnership with a minimum investment of $50,000 New Zealand.
Okay.
So by February 27th, he was able to secure $270,000, but was still short $200,000 by April 18th. So he had pretty much by April 18th, he had about $600,000. So at that time, he had changed his plea to $20,000 USD for 1-year interest-free loans to get past the finish line.
Okay.
So he makes it past the finish. He makes it across the line by the settlement date, as we all know. That happened on May 2nd, 2017, with more than a little help from his friends at ISTA and other organizations. And I guess, yeah, really, despite being an organism without an office, Wikipedia, at least at one point, was saying that Highden Temple was part of one of the permanent locations that it had. So, schools
That
back in
ISTA had?
session, but it's no longer a school, right? It's a very different,
Right.
because Robert Nichols, from what I've been able to pick up, probably around anywhere between 2008, 2010 is kind of when you can kind of pick up real evidence that Des and Lyon kind of started to meet. Could have
Okay.
absolutely been earlier if they crossed paths, but seems that
Right.
definitely the release of sex magic sort of definitely made it, there was more likely to be evidence that there's a formal connection there. I think, yeah, it was like 2009. I started seeing like real, not like real acknowledgement that they knew each other.
Okay.
From what I've been able to find, obviously, if there's something earlier or someone
Right.
has a more, has a more accurate source, absolutely, I acknowledge that. I'm kind of pulling off of archive websites, and things can happen.
Right.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. So that's kind of, and from 2017, it's, history as we know it.
Yeah, I don't know that the audience knows.
No,
We'll
that's
have a
true.
mixed crowd here. And so what's interesting, is that the point at which ISTA starts holding trainings at Haydn? Because there's kind of these two things that happen, right? Is ISTA's already going and doing their week-long retreats around the world, and Highden Temple's separate, but then this whole money buying thing happens, so there's some integration. I can't remember what year Level 2 came out at ISTA, because that, my understanding is Des, created ISTA and Level 1, and then it was Bruce and Ohad that helped design, and maybe Rex, I'm not sure, helped design this level
That sounds,
2,
that
which is
sounds,
a lot more
mm,
of a bridge to kind of the Haydn philosophy and kind of a feeder.
yeah, that sounds pretty about the same of what I know. ISTA, I have been able to find like sort of archive events, because so ISTA was operating in New Zealand before Haydn. I think
Okay.
they were elsewhere, like Tara, if not Tauranga, then certainly up north, a little bit further north, having workshops. But then once
Okay.
Haydn comes on the scene, yeah, it's definitely after, like, if not late to 2017, it's like late, like soon after, where they're hosting events.
Gotcha. And then Bruce is actually teaching ISTA trainings.
Ooh.
So, I mean, sometimes, if you're talking to the ISTA or Haydn crew, or you look at, when accountability came up, and, Bruce, out of the reports that were submitted through that Facebook group, which became Safer Sex Positive and Spiritual Communities,
Mhm.
Bruce had a lot of strikes in terms of people reporting, harm and coercion and allegations of misconduct. But when we approached ISTA and Bruce wasn't willing to engage. And then ISTA kept saying, "Well, Bruce isn't part of ISTA. These are two different things."
I mean, I can appreciate it. Yes, technically they are, but nonetheless, they are entwined organisms. You can look at the
Yes.
Haydn page now. There's testimonials from one of the current ISTA leaders, which is
Yep.
Raphael. Kamala
Yep.
was part of both organizations. I mean, she was in
Yep.
sex magic with Robert Des, and now she has kind of switched. I can't really say she switched allegiances, but she has kind of joined the other team. She has left ISTA and is now part of
Yes.
Haydn. That enmeshment of
Yeah.
the ISTA leaders into Haydn.
Yep.
Yeah, that's not that. Yeah, no, it's hard. Yeah, they are technically, they are two different structures, but we do have seen like financial records from
Yep.
recent lawsuit,
Yep.
in which, they do send funds. They do provide. ISTA does send money, or has sent money
Yep.
to
Yep.
Haydn. Whatever the purposes for the money was for, that's a different there's different arguments being made, and you can find those arguments online.
Right, right, right. There's questions.
Yeah.
There's different stories about what's going on there.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think that's really interesting. The first ISTA retreat that I went to in April of 22, so right before 6 months before when I was still uh, in it, or actually that was April of 21 was my first one. And there were at least two participants. One was an assistant who talked quite a bit about Haydn
Mhm.
and the narrative or like the glam around it was like, yeah, ISTA's intense and it's like a 1 week, you know, experience and initiation. But if you're really hardcore, if you're really in, you're going to go to Haydn for 6 weeks. Like that's the real thing.
That's
And so I was,
post-grad.
right, exactly, you know? And so there, and then I've noticed like, oh, there's a lot of shared facilitators or back and forth assistance. Um, and so the idea that they're not enmeshed, at least from creating curriculum, delivering curriculum, where they deliver it is just not factually accurate. Like there's clearly all these enmeshments. Yeah.
And I think one of the observations I made, and again, this is my opinion, is that before we get these before I've been able to identify a time when Bruce was likely to have met Nichols, um, his writing, seems definitely be a lot more his. There's no mention of sex.
Yeah.
That come like talking about the mentions and discussion about sex in Bruce's writings only comes in after like 2009, 2010. Because yeah, what was it like? He's writing his own voice really more so in his 2007 book, Working with the Will. There's really no mention of this transmitting with Jujwal Cool. Whereas
Ah,
it's sort of 2013 in occult cosmology, which is assumed, which is, you could say was written afterwards. Um, DK is kind of the idea of transmitting is led by DK, but you do start seeing more mentions, as I said, more mentions of sex, like,
right.
and that sort of and intimate relationships.
Interesting.
Um, what else can I say? I think it was because DK, like the idea of transmitting with DK, he had gone quiet from about 2017 until the pandemic in 2020.
I tell you.
Um, and it's sort of after at 2020 that DK started transmitting more to Bruce as part of this lead up to 2025, the new
I see.
evolution of the hierarchy, and just casually sexier language. It's minimal at the same time.
So we get to now Bruce and Des and these pillars. And so some of those pillars, again, Ohad, I understand, is one of the pillars. Is that accurate?
It's hard to tell. If you look at the
Okay.
archive website, the archive version from that time, like 2010, they have a section for pillars, but they don't mention that the connection between the pillars on the website versus say how Bruce mentioned pillars or described pillars in his Facebook page as a financial contributor. That
Okay.
Ohad's name is under, as a on the website as a pillar.
Okay. And are there other names we recognize as pillars?
Do you want to give me 5 seconds and I
Do
can
you
pull it up for you?
remember? Sure.
Okay. Yes, here we go. Share. Can you see that?
Yes.
So we have Araminta, Ohad, Winter, Rex, Dawn, poor Dion Pete Deepa, who rest in peace. She was running the Finnish temple, right? And she died of cancer.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh yeah, no, she died of cancer quite a couple years ago. She was running the
Oh. Well, and so maybe that so we're looking here at it says meet our posts. Posts are people who care deeply for the work and want to help it anchor on the physical plane.
Mhm.
Posts support the holding of our vision and its expansion into the world. And so there's 10 people listed here, some of whom I'm familiar with, some of whom I'm not.
Mhm.
But Dawn Izrahi is Ohad's wife.
Mhm.
Ohad's there, Araminta Barbour, and Winter Jade Isley, and Rex McCon, who are all active, um, ongoing
Mm,
with ISTA. Ohad is no longer part of ISTA, but he's still, in the mix. But Dawn is still teaching
yeah.
ISTA training. So very entwined.
Hmm.
So then just to as we wrap up,
Hmm.
and we can always come back to talk, more about Haydn since then. But I think what's helpful is you mentioned the Finnish temple. And so speaking a little bit to the fact that this is not a single temple, but it's about a network of landing temples.
Yeah, so I think this is part of that evolution in how Bruce has sort of envisioned Haydn within the global scale of Alice Bailey's vision of the externalization of the spiritual hierarchies. Because as you know, within occult meditation, again, it's listed that there are schools in certain locations around the world that are placed on vortexes, which are meant to sort of help spread energy and spread power around the world. So we have part of this, I guess you could say, the franchising of Highden Temple has been sort of the encouragement of students to go off and start landing temples in key places. So we have there was a temple in Finland. I don't know if it's still operating. It was led by someone who was quite close to Bruce, or at least, someone who Bruce had worked with for quite a long time. And that individual has passed away from cancer just a couple of years ago, which
Right.
is quite sad. We have Rex McCann, who is a long-term ISTA Haydn person, and he's been running trainings and temples, I believe, in Greece. We have Marcus Wu, and up until he for a couple years was operating a temple at a Chesapeake
Oh,
in the U.S. That shut down about 2024.
okay.
Marcus was also, had finished the Haydn training, and also for a period of time was listed on the Singularity website, which is a whole nother aspect of where ISTA grads have gone off to, Haydn grads, I should say, have gone off
Right.
to. And I think when somewhere in the Sierra Mountains, there was a cabin that was built, under the Shambhala name. Um,
Okay.
so that's kind of where I know at the moment there have or are temples.
And then the other ones I've heard, Portugal, there's something um there. I will have to look
It gets a little
that one up again.
it gets a little bit muddy now because again, we think about that enmeshment of ISTA and Haydn. We have again,
Yeah.
the enmeshment, but now what seems to be something of a divorce, because
Right.
because of the accusations that are becoming public. There's lots of blame games going on, and there has been a very public schism in a sense between Bruce and Robert Nichols, as polite as they try to make their letters kind of seem. Um,
Right. They've each released letters to the public or to the organizations that call each other out,
Yeah, on
basically.
Facebook. On Facebook. They're calling each other out on Facebook. No one's really putting out a press release here. Um, but I guess what's interesting is that in the time leading up to that, of course, we had lots of former, long-standing leaders and teachers in those organizations kind of go their own way or leave the organization. And that has led to some very interesting mutations, I suppose, of the organism, in which we are seeing these former teachers actually starting to establish their own communities or their own practices or
Right.
their own skills. Um, so we're starting to see sort of similar Haydn-esque communities with an
Yeah.
ISTA flavor, in, Portugal, um,
Costa Rica.
uh, and so that's going to be something that we probably need to start, for people who are sort of in this advocacy space
Yeah.
or who want to demand that ISTA and Haydn do better, um, to actually start looking at hey, what's happening if you start taking ISTA and the problems with ISTA and the problems with Haydn and you are isolating them? What does that mean?
Right. Right. Well, you're replicating and isolating, I guess,
And you
right? Is
but you're putting it into a country where, you may not necessarily
right.
have the same protections.
Right. Absolutely.
Mm.
Whoa. And so there's the one thread I'll pull is you mentioned the singularity, and
Mhm.
then the other one is Avatara.
Yeah, so, that's kind of more, John Eden Kahn. He was a long time, he's been a long time associate of Bruce's. I think he
Okay.
was definitely a big contributor to the Shambhala school in those intermediate years. And now he's kind of become a leader in his own right, though he still kind of draws heavily on from Bruce
Okay.
with this political party. It's not quite a political part. The Singularity is not a political party in a traditional sense. It's meant to be a global leadership group. Again, even though it doesn't quite always say Alice Bailey, it's still the very same principles of the
Mm,
Lucis Trust and Alice Bailey's work from the Trans-Himalayan teachings of, you know,
mhm.
let's try, externalizing the hierarchies, but as well as, trying to tr- trying to initiate peace and human spiritual evolution. So,
Right, which all sounds great. Who doesn't want
but it's very
that?
business.
Like, what?
It's very business oriented. Like it's people already being assigned to these leadership roles, like in
Mm,
economic and environment, but not letting people vote, and choose who their leaders are going to be. It's not democratic whatsoever.
mhm, mhm.
So
Right, and that's something yeah, I thought, ISTA, when they said they were an organism, I thought, "Oh, you're like a collective or a cooperative, and that means you have to behave somewhat democratically and share power," and it's like, "Oh, no, it's a hierarchical structure with"
we choose. We have people who we already have in mind who will be the leaders
Yeah,
here because we think
yeah.
it'll be fine, even though we haven't invited anybody. They host big summits, online summits every year. Um,
Avatara or Singularity or
Singularity
both?
does.
Oh, Singularity.
Yeah. I didn't check in this year. I did check in the year
Yeah.
before. I mean, you get about 20, 30 people showing you like who were there when I was online, which is, not great for a global initiative. But I'm not sure what it's
Right.
like if they're for their in-person gatherings either.
Mm,
Mm.
interesting. Goodness. So part of it is like this crazy piece of land with its own history, being a school, a religious school, a school down under, and then the mystery school, the kind of coming together of ISTA and Haydn, and then Haydn's impact on ISTA, one could say, because level 2 is quite dramatically different
Mhm.
in many ways than level 1. I think it's part of the reason a lot of people who've only done level 1 struggle so much with the cult characterization,
Mhm.
whereas once you've been an assistant or been in level 2, it's much easier to understand uh, the bullshit going on. And and then we have kind of this I don't know if it's a diaspora, but basically, since in the last year, I think there's like 5 or 6 facilitators, assistants, organizers, maybe more who have left ISTA.
Mhm.
Some real long time folks, some have gone to Haydn, and then others, like you said, are taking it and just going and doing their own thing, but
Without
just the
really
way
constructing what,
absolutely.
like whether it actually works, whether they are actually they have the skills and capacity to run this like you need something more than just I'm going to do this better than Bruce, I'm going to do this better than Des, I'm going to do this with blackjack and hookers. um you need something more than that.
I mean, I think we would say that, but I think that, given that, for example, that ISTA's curriculum and level 1 didn't change for some 8, 9 years is what insiders are saying. Like literally it was like you just follow the playbook. You got a couple places you can customize it, but you're pretty much a cover band. Um, they don't seem so they are like, well, I got the binder and I'm going to tweak it like this and I'm going to carry on, because a lot of them don't think there are issues with what they're doing,
Exactly.
or that those issues, like you said, can be resolved without profound deconstruction and building fresh. So they're like, we'll fix it up here, which I get. I also have tried to fix things up here when really they needed to be addressed down here. So
There's some
yeah.
deep work. But this is a thing about an organism. This is a thing about an organism that has parasites or that is unwell or that is, rotting from the inside. That infection can spread.
Right. Right. Wow. Well, thank you for taking
No worries.
us through the history. Are there any, like, yeah, final thoughts or anything you want the audience to consider or take with them?
I guess I want to make it clear, like, I have never attended an ISTA training, and of course, the views I express here are my own. They don't reflect the views of my employers or any professional organizations I'm a part of.
Yes.
A lot of what I write for the skeptics, I'm doing from as a layperson. But I will say that, what I've noticed about, like, what I find always interesting about Haydn and ISTA is that they are trying to straddle, being very analog organizations in a digital age, and
Interesting.
what that entails for how you advertise yourself, how um, teachers and alumni are able to discuss and how they learn about you. And I guess one thing that sadly is kind of may make ISTA and Haydn a little bit more like traditional cults is, that level of secrecy, obviously
Yeah.
unsurprising, but also the destruction of history. Um, a lot of my writing is about looking at the history of cults.
Yeah.
Sometimes I am kind of lucky where I've been able to find hard copies of journals like Centerpoint. Someone
Yeah.
had the foresight to keep their collection of all the Centerpoint magazines. So you can access those and look at that. It's a read. Um,
Right.
Someone also had the foresight to actually collect and preserve a lot of old Scientology materials that they would have in their offices. So I've been able to see some
Right.
really interesting posters that, Scientology would say, no, no, we don't teach that. And it's like, well, actually, here's your official publication in like
Yeah.
A1 size poster. Um, but
Right.
with groups that operate largely online, like say Twin Flames or Teal Swan. And again, like Haydn or ISTA, if you are largely writing online and publishing online or publishing in newsletters and emails, we don't often keep those stuff. Like we often delete our newsletters.
Right.
We don't print them off really. Like not we used to in the '90s, but we don't do that now.
Right.
One of the things that it makes it very easy for charismatic people to continue to cause harm is being able to erase the past.
Right.
Many oftentimes, when groups and cult leaders and problematic organizations hit a spot of trouble, they try to reinvent themselves.
Right.
A little bit easier
Yes.
like it's a little bit easier with analog and with previous cults because they've been able to request that their like followers burn or throw away their old materials. And many people do, particularly when they leave a group. They don't want to be reminded of the
Yeah.
terrible things. And I
Totally.
absolutely understand that you don't want that toxicity in your house. You get rid of it.
I
Um,
burned some stuff.
yeah. but
I don't have
but
it anymore.
but now, like, even though a
Right.
lot of my work uses the Wayback Machine,
Yeah.
we now have, it's very easy for people to say, "Don't archive my website," and then all of a sudden, all evidence that they may have made this post disappears. So we see that, some of the people who have been involved with Haydn and ISTA, websites of theirs that may have cited or included links for in my articles, they're now gone. They have been excluded because you could ask the Wayback Machine to.
Oh,
So,
I didn't
I think
know
that,
that.
so if your listeners are involved in ISTA and Haydn or have less ISTA and Haydn, yes, I understand that you want to, may want to get rid of like this absolute reminder of a really terrible or unpleasant period of your life. But,
Yeah.
how do we preserve this? How do we preserve this evidence or history of what's happened to this
History.
organization so that, if there's a reinvention or another evolution,
Right.
that we're keeping on track of it. And I think some of the things that I do with the skeptics and what you do with this podcast is trying to at least, provide that, yes, this evidence did exist once, even though people are trying to,
Yeah.
people may delete it or try to take it off the web. It's a very, it's a very fragile and a vulnerable set of evidence. And I think we should be, sometimes pushing back on people deleting things too soon or being allowed to take things off the web too quickly.
Fascinating. Right. Because if you can't connect the dots because the evidence is erased, then we can claim anything,
Hmm.
right? We've got nothing stopping us from claiming anything.
Or, you just like, or in my case, it's like, you just have incomplete histories. Cause I was sort of thinking like, I don't know, when I was writing this, I didn't know that there was a 1997 connection between Anderson and Lyon until, I found a website link for particularly for the University of Seven Rays. Found out that someone
Right.
had decided to archive that website. Thank you,
Right.
1997 individual who made that random choice. You made 2022 Bronwyn very happy.
Right. So, I mean, I just want to appreciate how much sleuthing you're doing as far as following these links and being able to piece together. It's it's not just out there laid out. You've actually gone and done the sleuthing, the research, the collecting, and the piecing together, which is obvious in your writing. And then you've walked us through a big piece of that here. So, thank you for being a historian actually in this
A lay
situation.
historian, I suppose.
Lay historian,
Yeah,
yes.
it's rewarding work. I don't want to say I'm autistic. I don't want to say it's a special interest because I am very cognizant that people have been harmed. This is very serious
Yeah.
shit that's been going on.